The lantern's flame danced low against the frost-laced windowpane, its golden light barely warming the edges of Samuel Boone's quiet world. Outside, snow fell in solemn sheets, each flake like a whisper from heaven, piling softly atop the slanted barn roof. Inside the house, the fire was tame, his supper untouched, and the old rocking chair creaked under his stillness. He wasn't waiting for anything, just listening. Samuel had stopped expecting change 2 winters ago, the day they buried his wife beneath a cottonwood tree that refused to bloom come spring. Since then, the ranch had run on quiet and routine: feed the horse, split the wood, drink his coffee black from a chipped enamel mug. There were no chickens anymore, no eggs to gather, no one to fuss about flour or speak of town sermons. Only the barn remained stubborn with purpose. That night, it was the sound that shifted him, the thud that didn't belong to wind or wood or snow. A low groan, as if the earth itself had stirred. He took the lantern and his rifle, stepped out into the blue-black cold where breath became fog, and the sky pressed down like a wool blanket soaked in sorrow. Snow crunched beneath his boots, each step careful, steady. When he slid the barn door aside, the hinges sang with rust, and the lantern caught shapes that did not belong. They were bundled in shadows near the hayloft ladder, motionless, huddled, small. Children. 7 of them, pressed together like pups against the side of a woman who lay slumped, her back against a post. She didn't move, save for the flutter of breath on her cracked lips. Blood stained her sleeve. One child, a girl with dark braids and eyes too old for her face, met his gaze without flinching. "Please don't," she said. Just that. No begging, no explanation. Samuel stood there, rifle forgotten, lantern trembling in his grip. She looked like something out of a parable. A woman in tatters, surrounded by shivering young. Snow slipped through a hole in the roof and dusted her shoulders like ashes on a mourner. Her feet were bare. He took off his coat. Quietly, without a word, he stepped forward and laid it over the woman's body. The youngest boy began to cry then, a soft, hiccuped whimper, as if he had tried so long to stay silent but had reached the end of his strength. "Shoo!" the girl whispered, stroking the boy's hair. Samuel knelt beside the woman and touched her forehead. "Fever, but alive." "There's a fire in the house," he said, voice low, unused to company. "It's warmer there." No one moved. He turned and left the lantern, walked back through the snow, entered the house, stoked the hearth high, boiled water, cut bread thick and spread it with what was left of the apple preserve his wife had made their last autumn together. Then he waited, and they came. Not all at once, but in slow procession, like ghosts testing the edge of a blessing. The girl led them in, her chin up, dragging the wounded woman's feet across the floor as gently as she could. Samuel didn't help. Not because he wouldn't, but because he understood the sacredness of dignity, and how easily it broke beneath offered pity. One by one, they curled up near the fire, the youngest asleep before the warmth touched him. The woman, mother or not, was placed on Samuel's cot. He stood by the door, hat in hand, the fire crackling between them like a barrier of untold stories. "Who are you?" he asked. The girl shrugged. "Hungry." He nodded. "I've got stew. Not much, but hot." Another boy, freckled, sharp-eyed, eyed him like a coyote would a trap. "You gonna make us work for it?" "No." "Gonna call the sheriff?" "No." The girl looked at him hard then, like she was measuring his weight against her own weariness. "Then we'll eat." They did. In silence. It wasn't until the woman stirred, sometime near midnight, that the room shifted. Her eyes opened, and Samuel saw in them the flash of fear and shame. She sat up fast, clutching the blanket to her chest, breath ragged. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe here." Her lip trembled. "The barn." "You were freezing. I didn't know it was your land." "Still is," he replied. "Doesn't matter." She looked around, counted the children, her hands flying to each head in turn. "They followed me. You were leading." She blinked at him, then at the fire. "We won't stay long." "You will tonight." She said nothing more, only nodded. Later, after they'd fallen asleep on the rug, Samuel moved quietly through the room, covering thin shoulders with the quilt his wife had sewn, tucking a wool sock onto the smallest boy's foot. His rifle remained above the mantel, untouched. Outside, the snow deepened. Coyotes howled in the far hills. But the house was still. He didn't sleep. Not that night. At first light, he went to the barn to begin chores. The mare nickered softly as he passed. And there, beneath a wooden beam, he saw what had startled him the night before. The beam cracked where water had rotted through. A piece of the roof had fallen, the snow piling inside. "When snow falls through the roof," he murmured, "best patch it quick." He fixed it before breakfast, the sound of his hammer echoing into the cold morning. By the time he returned to the house, the woman was up, limping but upright, spooning broth into the smallest child's mouth. She didn't look at Samuel when he entered, only said, "Thank you." He set his tools down. "What's your name?" She hesitated, as if afraid to speak it aloud. "Nora." He waited. "The children, some are kin. Some just stuck with me. 7's a weight to carry." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "They're lighter than loneliness." Samuel felt something stir in him then. Not desire, not pity. Just recognition. He offered her a mug of hot water with lemon peel. "I'm Samuel Boone. You're welcome here till the storm passes." She took the cup. Their fingers didn't touch. The girl with braids, older than the others, maybe 12, watched everything from the corner. "We've heard men say things like that before." Samuel met her eyes. "Then I reckon you'll know soon enough whether I mean it." She nodded once, slowly. A truce. By noon, Nora was washing the floor with a rag she'd stitched back together from torn fabric. The children played with carved wood animals Samuel had long since packed away. Laughter, thin and surprised, floated into the rafters. He didn't join them. Just watched from the porch, sipping coffee gone cold, his thoughts tangled like old rope. That night, he placed more blankets by the hearth. The cot remained hers. The children slept in heaps, feet over arms, heads nestled like nesting birds. And as he lay down on the floorboards with his back to the door, Samuel realized. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a story beginning. The house had a rhythm now. Slow, like a hymn hummed under breath. Morning embers stirred to life, tin cups clinking soft, children's bare feet padding across pine floorboards still cold from the night. Nora moved with quiet precision, favoring one leg as she swept or folded or stitched, always keeping one eye on the youngest, who clung to her skirt like a second shadow. Samuel didn't ask questions. He measured his days in small offerings, splitting more wood than usual, leaving his coffee pot fuller than needed, setting the broom near the door where she could reach it without bending too far. She never asked for help. He never insisted. But there were glances. Long ones, caught between tasks. Waited with a silence that said more than courtesy. He noticed how she stirred soup without tasting it. How she folded the same quilt twice in a row when she thought no one was watching. She noticed how he turned his wedding band around his finger when he stood too long in thought. They shared the same porch, same fire, same air, but remained strangers tied by the fragile thread of decency. The soup was thin that second night. Just boiled potatoes and onion, no salt. Nora served it without a word, lips pressed tight. He tasted it, swallowed, and said only, "Warm does fine." She sat last, waited until the children had their fill. Then she spooned what little was left into her own bowl and didn't eat it. The freckled boy, Jed, watched her from across the table. "Ain't there no salt here neither?" Nora's voice was firm. "Don't complain." Samuel leaned back, slow. "There's salt. I just forgot." The boy looked to him. "You forget a lot?" "I remember what matters." The table went quiet. Outside, the wind teased the eaves, and inside, the fire cracked like bone beneath too much weight. Nora's eyes lingered on the pot for a long while before she rose and carried it to the basin. She didn't cry, but her hands shook. The next morning, Samuel found her kneeling beside the hearth, scrubbing the soot from the bricks with a rag no bigger than her palm. Her bandaged hand pressed too hard. He set down the bucket he was carrying. "You don't need to do all this." She kept scrubbing. "I do." "Why?" "Because this place don't feel borrowed when it's clean." He didn't argue. By midweek, town had noticed. It started with Miss Agatha Winslow, who caught sight of the children's socks hanging from Samuel's fence like mismatched flags of some scandalous new nation. She leaned on her parasol and squinted, her lips tightening like string around a gift she was eager to deliver, wrapped in judgment. By evening, the blacksmith's daughter whispered it at the feed store. "He's housing a woman and 7 children like it's some sanctuary." The banker's wife added color, said the woman wore no shoes, claimed she saw the youngest girl carrying firewood like a servant. The town hadn't cared about Samuel in 2 years. Now, they all remembered his name. Pastor Silas Harper, broad-shouldered and soft-eyed, received 3 letters that week, each concerned with the moral temperature of the Boone household. He read them by lamplight, folded them neatly, and said nothing. But Samuel noticed eyes on him in town. He caught murmurs behind prayer hands at the general store. No one said it outright, but every glance carried the weight of what people think they'd do better if grief hadn't made them so righteous. When he returned home one afternoon, he found Nora seated on the porch, mending a boot with a thread looped through the eye of a rusted needle. Her knuckles were red, raw from scrubbing. "There was a woman in town," she said without looking up. "She turned her face when I passed." He sat beside her. "Miss Winslow thinks God watches through curtains." Nora gave a faint laugh. "She's wrong. God watches through eyes like yours. Quiet men who let strangers sleep under their roofs." Samuel didn't answer. He watched her fingers work the boot leather, slow and stubborn. A long silence passed. She broke it with a question that wasn't really one. "I'll leave when the snow melts." He nodded, though something in him recoiled at the thought. "You don't have to go." She kept stitching. "You'll want to marry again." "I already did," he said. "She's in the ground." That was the end of it. The thread snapped in her fingers. Inside the house, one of the children began to sing. A low, wandering tune, no words, just hums and sighs and the occasional call of "Mama." Nora's eyes glassed, but she blinked it away and stood. Later, he found her in the barn, tending to the children's makeshift sleeping area. They'd lined crates with straw, turned saddle blankets into mattresses, and nailed a patchwork curtain across the open slats. It wasn't comfort, but it was order. The girl with the braids approached Samuel near the stall. "Ma says we'll leave soon. But we ain't got nowhere else." He looked down at her, 12, maybe 13, face already learning how to hide emotion. "You think I want you gone?" She hesitated. "People in town do." "I'm not the town. You're just one man." He nodded. "Sometimes that's all it takes." The girl studied him like she was memorizing his silhouette. "You talk like a book. My wife liked poetry." She said nothing more, just went back inside. That night, the soup was thicker. She'd found flour somewhere, and he'd added salt. The children noticed. They didn't say anything, but they licked their bowls clean, and one of the boys offered a clumsy, "Thanks, mister." Nora smiled, faintly. "He's called Samuel," she said. It was the first time she'd said his name. After dinner, Samuel stepped outside and watched the stars bloom above the hills. The frost bit sharper now, the wind less forgiving. But something in the air had shifted, like the house itself was bracing for a new shape. She joined him on the porch, wrapping a blanket over her shoulders. "You've been kind," she said. He nodded. "You've been strong." She studied the trees beyond the fence, bare and brittle, reaching skyward like they remembered warmth. "My family didn't want me," she whispered. "Said I was bad luck. Said anyone who gathered strays deserved the life they got." "Then I guess we deserve each other," he replied. She laughed, a sudden, startled thing, and then clamped a hand over her mouth like it wasn't allowed. But it was real. Full. It left color in her cheeks. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not the wounds or the weight, but the woman, upright, unbroken, holding together what the world had torn. When she turned to go inside, she paused. "Do you miss her?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "But missing doesn't mean there's nothing left." She nodded once, then closed the door softly behind her. Samuel stayed outside. The night was quiet but not empty. A single lantern still burned in the barn. Children breathed slow in sleep, and a woman with torn hands had made soup worth remembering. The morning began with laughter. Not loud, not wild, just a series of small, startled chuckles from behind the barn. Samuel paused mid-swing with his axe, listening. It had been weeks since the ranch echoed with anything other than wind and quiet chores. Laughter was an unfamiliar visitor. He followed the sound. Behind the barn, the children were gathered around a tin constructed with twine, its sides punched with tiny holes in the shape of stars. Jed held it high like a lantern, grinning wide. "See," he said. "Lights up with fireflies, if you catch him right." "I told you," the braid-haired girl added. "It don't take silver to make a star." Samuel smiled. "Where'd you learn that?" The girl shrugged. "Somebody who didn't stay long." He didn't ask more. They'd lived enough stories already. Inside the barn, Nora knelt on a milking stool, patching the same worn dress she'd arrived in. The rip along the hem was jagged, the thread uneven. But she worked it with slow reverence, as though each stitch were a kind of penance. Her fingers moved with muscle memory, not joy. He didn't announce himself. Just leaned against the post. "That the only dress you got?" She didn't look up. "It's the only one I didn't leave behind on purpose." He let the silence sit. Then softly, "What happened before the barn?" Her hand froze mid-stitch. "It's all right if you don't want to say," he added. "But I'd rather hear it from you than the town." She set the needle down. "My sister's husband wanted me gone," she said flatly. Said mouths like mine emptied pantries. "After the drought hit and their baby died, he blamed me for that too. Called me cursed. And the children? Some were already with me. Some joined along the way. Word gets around, who's got an open wagon bed, who'll share a crust of bread, who won't hit you at night. I tried to keep us moving. But snow came early, and so did sickness." Her voice thinned. "When the youngest got fever, I carried him 2 days. Thought maybe I'd find a church, or a fence with a dog that didn't bark. That's how I found your barn." "You walked 2 days carrying him?" Samuel asked. She nodded. "Didn't seem like 2. Just seemed like, till I couldn't anymore." He stepped forward, crouched beside her. His eyes landed on the dress in her lap. "That stitch is crooked." She gave a quiet laugh. "I wasn't raised to mend. I was raised to smile pretty and take orders. Looks to me like you unlearned that part." She looked at him, eyes tired but not hollow. "You don't have to fix everything all at once," he said. "Sometimes it's enough to just sit still and breathe." She looked down. "I don't remember the last time I breathed without fear in my throat." He stood and offered a hand. "Let's take a walk." They walked the fence line in silence, boots crunching the frost that lingered in shadows. She limped slightly, but didn't complain. At the far edge of the pasture, a hawk circled above a distant ridge. Nora squinted into the pale light. "There's a stillness out here," she said. Samuel nodded. "That's why I stayed. After Eliza passed, it was the only thing that didn't ask anything from me." She didn't speak for a while. Then, "I don't think I ever had stillness. Even as a girl, I was always making myself small enough to fit inside other people's plans." He glanced at her. "You don't seem small now." "I'm not," she said simply. "I just don't know what to do with all this space yet." That evening, the sky burned gold before sinking into blue. The children helped with supper. They'd learned the rhythm of the place now, who fetched wood, who stirred the pot, who kept the fire. Samuel watched as the braid-haired girl lifted the littlest boy onto a stool and whispered something that made him giggle. "They're yours," he said quietly to Nora. "Some of them," she said. All of them when it matters. He nodded. That's the best kind of family. After supper, a knock sounded at the door. It was Miss Agatha Winslow. Wrapped in gray shawl and self-importance, she peered past Samuel like she expected sin to be stitched into the furniture. Her lips pursed, prepared for battle. "I brought a basket," she said. "Bread, dried pears, soap." He raised a brow. "That's so. I'm not blind to suffering," she said. "Even if you've chosen to fill your house with it." Nora stepped into view. Agatha's eyes narrowed. "Well," she said, "I suppose you're not the harlot the town's making you out to be." Nora didn't flinch. "No, ma'am. Just a woman who got tired of being used and left to starve." Agatha blinked, as if startled by honesty. "I'll leave the basket by the porch," she said stiffly. "And I expect to see those children in church this Sunday." Nora tilted her head. "Even the ones who don't know how to sit still." Agatha gave a faint smile despite herself. "Especially those." After she left, Nora watched the basket like it might bite. "Is that what forgiveness feels like?" she asked. "No," Samuel said. "That's what shame disguised as generosity looks like." She looked at him. "You don't think people can change?" "I think they change slow. If you're lucky." That night, as the fire dimmed and the house hushed, Nora lingered by the window, her mended dress hanging neatly over the chair. Samuel joined her, holding a folded square of blue cloth. "I found this," he said. "Was Eliza's. She used to wear it when she planted beans." Nora unfolded the fabric. It was soft, faded, but clean. A dress. "I can't take this," she whispered. "I'm not asking you to. Just offering." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because I don't like seeing someone beautiful in something that hurts her." The room stilled. She touched the fabric, pressed it to her cheek for just a moment, then held it to her chest. In the morning, she wore it. The children noticed first. "You look like a picture book lady," the youngest declared. The girl with braids smiled, then reached into a satchel and pulled out a string of pressed tin stars. "We made you something." Nora took the necklace in both hands. "It's beautiful." "It's not silver," the girl said, shy. "No," Nora said. "It's better." She turned to Samuel, eyes glassed with something close to peace. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, but didn't speak. Words would have made it smaller. Instead, he watched as she moved through the room with a new stillness, not because fear had fled, but because she'd made a home in spite of it. And that, he realized, was the start of healing. The wind shifted before the sun did. It came sharp down the slope, smelling of dust and horses. Samuel paused mid-stride in the pasture, one hand resting on the fence rail, the other still clutching a tin pail of feed. A ripple passed through the air like memory warning him of something not yet seen. By the time he reached the porch, the dog was growling low and steady. The children, who had been chasing each other around the yard with ribbons of old cloth, froze like deer in brush. Nora stepped out of the barn doorway, her hands still dusted with flour from kneading bread. Her face lost color. He followed her gaze. A man rode down the ridge, saddle high and swagger loud, flanked by two more thin-lipped shadows in wool coats and dust-crusted hats. The lead rider leaned heavy in the saddle, as though the land owed him for having the audacity to carry his weight. His voice preceded him. "Thought I'd find you here, Nora." Samuel's jaw tensed. The children clustered behind Nora. She didn't move, didn't blink. "Get inside," Samuel said softly. "They won't hurt me," she murmured. "Not the point." She turned, gathered the children with a gesture, her face empty of emotion. The girl with the braids stood her ground a beat longer than the others, staring at the approaching riders with narrowed eyes. Then she followed. Samuel stepped down from the porch. The rider dismounted with a grunt, tossing the reins aside like a man who never cared to tie things properly. He approached, boots crunching gravel, hand resting on the butt of a pistol that gleamed like a threat in polished steel. He smelled of tobacco and sour whiskey. "Well," he said, looking Samuel over. "Ain't you the stray collector?" Samuel didn't answer. "You the man feeding my brother's property?" "I don't feed property," Samuel said, voice low. "Just people." The man laughed, loud and hoarse. "She ain't people. She's a curse dressed up in grace. Always pretending to be righteous while running off with what ain't hers." "She walked away." "Did she?" The stranger's grin twisted. "Funny how every place she lands ends up with something missing. Money, food, a little decency." "She brought life," Samuel said. "She brought filth." That word broke something. Samuel stepped forward, and for the first time, the man's hand tightened on his pistol. The two others flanked out, circling like wolves scenting blood. "Touch that gun," Samuel warned, "and I'll bury you with it." Silence snapped tight around the words. The man licked his lips. "I just want what's mine. She's not yours, and never was. She married my brother. She bore his name." "She bore your shame," Samuel said. The stranger's grin faltered. Nora's voice rang out behind them. "Isaac, go home." The man turned. "You still think you got a voice? After dragging 7 mouths across the territory like stray dogs." "They followed me because I fed them," she said, "and because I never raised a hand. Charity ain't the same as worth." Samuel stepped between them. "You've got 5 seconds to leave." Isaac smirked. "Or what? You'll see your own back from a shovel." The tension cracked. One of the riders twitched, and Samuel reached for his own side. Not a gun, but the handle of the hatchet still tucked in his belt. The threat wasn't in the weapon. It was in the way he held himself, unafraid, unblinking, ready. Then the door opened again. Pastor Silas Harper. He walked up the path slow, calm, in his Sunday coat and work boots, hat in hand. His eyes took in the scene, Nora clutching her shawl, children's faces pressed to windows, Samuel coiled like spring steel, Isaac seething. "Gentlemen," Harper said. Isaac scoffed. "Reckon I didn't come for a sermon." "You came to the wrong house, then," the pastor replied. Isaac glanced sideways, calculating. "This about God? No. This is about decency. I came for what's owed." The pastor's voice lowered. "And you think screaming in front of children, pistol cocked, makes you right?" Isaac stepped back slightly. "She ran. She don't get to pretend she's innocent." The pastor's gaze didn't waver. "Innocence isn't the question. But the Lord watches how a man handles power." Samuel stepped forward again. "Your time's up." Isaac's hand hovered near his weapon, indecisive. And then came the sound. Boots. The children. One by one, they stepped out from the house. Not running. Not hiding. They stood beside Nora, tiny shoulders squared. The braid-haired girl moved to Samuel's side, chin lifted. Isaac stared at them. "What's this supposed to mean?" "It means they've chosen," Pastor Harper said. "You want to make orphans out of them?" "No," Samuel said. "I want to make them a home." Isaac stared, nostrils flared, then spat on the ground. "You'll regret this," he said. Samuel shrugged. "I've lived with worse regrets." Isaac mounted his horse. "You're soft. That's what she saw in you." "No," Nora said. "He's kind. Something you wouldn't recognize." Isaac's glare snapped toward her. "Last chance. Come with me and I'll forget the rest." "I already did," she replied. He snarled, pulled the reins, and rode off, dust rising like a curse behind him. The others followed without a word. When the sound of hoofbeats faded into silence, Samuel turned. Nora stood, arms loose at her side, shaking just enough for him to notice. Her eyes were wet. He didn't speak. Just walked to her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and stood beside her until her breathing slowed. The children drifted back into the house. Nora stayed. "He used to beat his brother," she said. "When I stopped it, they both turned on me." "I'm sorry." I'm not. I'm free now. He nodded. Yes, you are. She looked at him. Why didn't you draw? Because I didn't need to. A soft laugh escaped her, half broken, half grateful. You're not what I expected. You neither. They stood together as the sun dipped low, casting gold across the land that had borne so much sorrow and yet, somehow, kept blooming. Inside, supper waited. Bread risen, stew simmering. Outside, the wind had changed again, and with it, the shape of their future. The morning rose slow, as if even the sun paused to listen. The sky above Boone Ranch was pale and wide, its edges smudged in soft gold. In the stillness before rooster or kettle, before boots touched ground or breath fogged the windowpane, Samuel was already awake. He stood barefoot near the fire, rubbing warmth into his palms, eyes on the barn. Something had changed. Not outside, but inside him. The night before, after the stranger left and the dust settled, Nora had sat by the hearth, silent as ash, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of broth gone cold. He hadn't tried to fill the quiet. He'd only sat beside her, their shoulders touching once, lightly, like a whisper passed in church. She'd looked at him then, eyes tired, tearless, but certain. "If you asked me to stay," she said, "I wouldn't run." He hadn't spoken, but his answer lived in the way his hand found hers beneath the blanket. Now, with dawn creeping softly across the floorboards, he moved through the house. The children were still asleep, their limbs strewn like flower petals after wind. The girl with the braids had curled against her sister, cheeks ruddy, hair like a veil over both faces. Nora wasn't in the house. He stepped onto the porch, breath blooming in the early chill, and saw her by the well, wrapped in his coat, staring at the mountains. Her bare feet pressed into frost-stiff grass, like she didn't feel the cold. "You'll catch a cough," he called. She turned, slow. "I wanted to see the day start," she said. "I've never done that without dread in my belly." He walked to her, offered the boots slung over his shoulder. She didn't take them, just looked up at him. "Samuel," she said, "do you believe in second names?" He frowned gently. "How do you mean?" "A name you earn, not the one you're given. A name the world doesn't mock." He nodded. "Some folks get called widow or bastard their whole lives, even when they outgrow it. I want to outgrow mine." "You already have." A gust stirred the trees. She stepped close, resting her forehead on his chest. "I'd marry you," she whispered, "if you asked." He kissed the top of her head. By noon, the town had gathered. No bell had been rung. No letter had gone out. But when Pastor Harper's old mule ambled up to Boone Ranch, dressed in a dusty vestment robe, folks began to follow, half curious, half ashamed, all silent. Miss Winslow arrived with a loaf of cornbread and a prayer book held like a shield. The barn doors were open. Inside, candles burned along hay bales, soft light catching motes of dust that danced like blessings. The children were brushed and barefoot, their clothes patched but clean. The eldest held a wildflower bouquet, trembling just slightly. Samuel wore his wedding coat, wool, faded, still smelling faintly of cedar and tobacco. Nora stood barefoot in Eliza's blue dress. The hem was uneven. The neckline had been stitched tighter. But it fit, not just her body, but her spirit. The dress had waited for a second life. They faced each other, hands clasped, hearts bare. Pastor Harper said little. "Just enough." "Some vows come dressed in lace," he murmured, "and some come from the silence between breaths, when one soul recognizes another as shelter." The children gathered in a half-circle, holding hands. The youngest sneezed. Laughter stirred. Not loud, just real. And when the vows passed, soft as wind through cottonwood, Samuel pressed his brow to Nora's and said, "You're home." The guests did not cheer. But they did not leave, either. They lingered, silent witnesses to something that felt too sacred for applause. Even Miss Winslow found herself offering the cornbread to the eldest boy, who took it with both hands and said, "Thank you, ma'am," as if the world hadn't once turned its back on them all. That evening, With the barn empty and the land bathed in the hush of twilight, Samuel sat on the porch, his wife beside him. His wife. The word felt strange, not because it was new, but because it fit. Like boots worn long enough to remember your shape. She rested her head against his shoulder. "I've never been this still," she said. "Me neither. I feel like I don't have to look behind me anymore." "You don't." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything unspoken and understood. The children were inside, curled on quilts, bellies warm. The ranch, though still weather-worn and quiet, no longer echoed. There was laughter now. Steam from stew pots. Tin cans strung like lanterns above the barn door. The world hadn't changed. But the house had. And so had they. Nora reached into her pocket and pulled out the torn dress hem she'd patched weeks ago. "I kept this," she said, "to remind me where I started." Samuel took it, turned the fabric over in his hand. "Then let's bury it." She looked up. "We'll put it under the cottonwood," he said. "Same place I buried Eliza. Not to forget, just to begin again." Nora nodded. And they did. Under a sky soft with stars, with the wind rustling dry grass and candlelight flickering from the windows, they dug a shallow hole, placed the scrap inside, covered it with earth. No prayer was said, but a kind of peace took root. Later that night, as they lay beneath a single quilt, Nora whispered, "Do you think the world will remember us?" Samuel kissed her wrist. "No," he said, "but the children will." She smiled in the dark. "That's enough." And somewhere between midnight and morning, between what was and what could now be, the sun began to climb the ridge. Softly, like it, too, didn't want to disturb the beginning of a gentler story.